Hello and welcome to this revision guide for the EDUQAS English Language Paper 1, Section A, Question 5. Today we're going to look at Question 5, which is an evaluative response. First of all then, we need to consider, what does evaluative actually mean? Well, evaluative means to determine the effectiveness of. The examiner are going to give you an extract or passage from a much longer novel, and they're going to ask you to think about how effective that passage is. What does it make you think? What does it make you feel? So how does this question look on the exam paper? To answer this question, you must consider the passage as a whole. It will give you a question number here. It will give you a statement beginning with "the writer presents." It will then ask you, how far do you agree with this view? And then give you a couple of bullet points here to guide your response. Here then is a full example with the blanks filled in. To answer this question, you must consider the passage as a whole. The writer presents Jonathan as a failure as a father and a husband. How far do you agree with this view? You should write about your thoughts and feelings about how Jonathan is presented in the passage as a whole, and how the writer has created these thoughts and feelings. I've now colour-coded the question then with its key information. Let's break this question apart then and study the language the examiner is choosing to use to hint to you about what you should respond with. When the question says the passage as a whole, this hints that you are being asked about the full passage, which by now you will have read after answering questions 1 to 4 on the exam paper. This means they're expecting you to say different things about different parts of the passage. Some bits you might agree with, and others you might disagree with, or perhaps your opinion changes as you read about the character or situation you're given. They will then give you a statement that they expect you to mostly agree with. This is made clear by the opinion of the next line. How far? It is likely you will mostly agree with the statement they give you, but there are likely to be parts of the passage that also let you disagree. This means then that you can evaluate and critique the passage. You will tell the examiner which parts you do agree with and which you disagree with. The bullet points make really clear that this question is about your opinions, not what a word or phrase suggests or implies. The examiner is likely to be looking for a range of emotional responses from you. You can see from the screen, it is likely you're going to sympathise with parts of the passage, but perhaps disagree or even dislike other parts. As a general rule, you want to make really clear to the examiner that you're giving an emotional or opinionated response. Key advice to pass this section of the exam: use stronger emotions. Exaggerate just a little bit just to make your emotions clear. Sentences like, I really empathise with, it's gut-wrenching when they say, this makes me really think about, it forces me to question, all make really obvious the opinion that you have about what you're reading. Here's a short example then, taken from John Boyne's The Boy in Striped Pyjamas. The writer presents Bruno as a shy little boy. How far do you agree with this view? As you read this example then, you'll quickly work out that Bruno is quite shy, but there are reasons for this shyness that we'd want to look at in more depth. Hey you, the sergeant shouted, then adding a word that Bruno did not understand. Come over here, you. He said the word again, and something about the harsh sound of it made Bruno look away and feel ashamed to be part of this at all. Bruno slowly walked towards them, and Kotler spoke to them insolently, despite the fact the two were not related. Bruno felt himself begin to cry, slow tears dripping down his face. He felt like he was 4 years old, being told off for the first time. We can see the sergeant talking to Bruno as being quite abrupt and rude. So we might expect Bruno to cower away from the sergeant, which agrees with the statement then that Bruno might be quite shy. But it is a sergeant speaking to him. which means Bruno might also be scared, and that's why he's not willing to speak up. The sergeant's being rude by saying, "Come over here, you." He said the word again, and something about the harsh sound of it made Bruno look away. We can see here that Bruno is unwilling to look the sergeant in the face, which suggests then that Bruno is quite shy, and perhaps we feel sorry for him or empathy for him about the situation that is actually being submitted to. Bruno slowly walked towards them. Well, yes, this does show Bruno is shy, but we also know that he's probably quite scared of what the sergeant might do to him. He's scared of perhaps being punished. This makes me think then that I disagree with the statement. It isn't all about Bruno being shy here. It's also about the situation he's being forced into, and the fact that this sergeant seems to be being louder and more aggressive than Bruno actually is. Bruno felt himself begin to cry, slow tears dripping down his face. I now really empathise with Bruno, as clearly by this point Bruno is quite upset. This is no longer about him being shy. This is about him being physically scared and frightened, perhaps even petrified of the sergeant. He is unable to control his emotions anymore and feels a lot younger than he is, as it states when it says 4 years old, being told off for the first time. Bruno is remembering a much younger stage in his childhood, or a time where perhaps he was shy, and then almost thinking that he's being told off by an adult who is far more powerful and authoritarian than he is. Notice I'm selecting words from the passage and connecting that to an emotional response. I'm explaining how Bruno might feel, but also using my own opinions in my response. The criteria then you're being assessed with. This question tests the ability to evaluate text critically and support this with appropriate textual reference. To give 0 marks for this response, for this response where is nothing worthy of credit. If you give no opinions in your answer, you probably won't get any grade for it. 1 to 2 marks gives a simple personal opinion based on textual reference or quotes. Give 3 to 4 marks for personal opinion with textual references. For 3 to 4 marks, then you'd expect more than one reference to your opinion and how those link to what's actually happening in the passage. For 5 to 6 marks, they would want you to give an evaluation of the text and its effects, supported by textual reference with some critical awareness of the text as a whole. That last part in red there indicates then that they're looking for you to agree with the statement, but also at points disagree with it as well to get the pass mark, or 5 to 6 marks. For the higher grades, 7 or 8 marks would mean well-selected textual references with clear engagement in the text, which might involve links to the situation a character is in and how they think or feel at different times. And for top marks, that is a grade 7, 8 or 9, 9 or 10 marks are awarded to persuasive evaluation. This is where the stronger opinions come in, that are well communicated to the examiner and give an overview of the whole extract while still breaking it down into individual quotes and thinking how you respond or how you feel about each quote you give. Now we're going to look then at 3 different examples where students have tackled question 5 in the exam. This is the text that we're based on. Notice how long it is. It's quite a long read, but as I said, in question 1 to 4, you've already read this extract through in some depth and so also understand the situation and the characters. To remind ourselves, in case it's been a while since you've read it, let's read the extract through. In this story, Jonathan and Francis are a young married couple who are in Dorset for a week's holiday in a rented cottage. They have 2 young children called Lorna and Matthew. "Why does everything take so long?" moaned Jonathan. "It only takes me 5 minutes to get ready." Francis didn't even bother to answer. She was sagging with the effort and boredom of assembling everything needed for the morning out in the car. Juice, beaker with a screw-on lid, towels, change of clothes in case of car sickness, nappies, rattle. There was more. Was that it? Oh, come on, Jonathan, think, she said. I'm fed up of having to plan it all. What do you think I've been doing for the last hour? He shouted. Who was it who changed Matthew's nappy just now, eh? Congratulations, she said. Don't shout or I'll cry. Why is everything such a mess? Said Jonathan, picking up plastic spiders, dinosaurs, beads and bears, scowling grimly over the pile of primary colours. Oh, that spider, Daddy! Screamed Lorna. Give it to me! During the ensuing struggle, Frances thought about her tiredness. The year following the arrival of first Babel had gone in pure astonishment at the loss of freedom, but second time round it was spinning away in exhaustion. Matthew woke up at 1 a.m, 4 a.m, and Lorna at 6:30 a.m. During the days, fatigue wore her down. Are we ready at last? Said Jonathan, breathing heavily. Are we ready to go? They finally set off to visit the cottage where the writer Thomas Hardy was born. When they arrived, Jonathan paid the keeper of Hardy's cottage. Right, you can go through, but keep the children under control, won't you? Said the keeper. They moved through the low-ceilinged rooms, whispering to impress the importance of good behaviour on Lorna. This is the room where he was born, said Jonathan, ahead of the stairs. The doctor thought he was dead and tried to look after the mother, but the midwife noticed the baby was breathing. And Hardy carried on till he was 87, said Frances. Don't talk, shouted Lorna. Don't shout, replied Jonathan. Lorna fixed him with a calculating blue eye and produced an ear-splitting scream. The baby jerked in his arms and started to howl. Hardy didn't have any children, did he? Said Jonathan above the din. I'll take them outside. I've seen enough. You stay up here for a bit longer if you want to. Frances stood alone in the silence of the empty room and moved about the furniture, thinking what it would be like in a convent, blessed place where all is silence. Jonathan was sitting outside with the baby on his lap by a row of flowers, reading to Lorna from a newly acquired book. When he saw Frances approaching, he said, Look, I bought one of Hardy's novels to read when I get a spare moment. Spare moment, said Frances. But how lovely you look with the children at your knees and the flowers round the cottage door. How I would like to be the one coming back from work to find you with the children all bathed with a hot meal in the oven. I could unwind with a glass of beer in the garden. I don't get that when I get home, Jonathan reminded her. That's because I'm not organised enough yet, said Frances. But still, I wish it could be the other way round, or at least share things half and half. And I was also thinking what a cheesy thing English literature is. Why all those old men telling lies about love and life? Real life isn't like that, is it? By the time they returned to their rented cottage, they were exhausted. Jonathan watched Frances collapse into a chair and with the children all over her. Before babies, they'd been well matched. Then, with the arrival of their first child, she'd felt as if she were drowning. He'd watched, ineffectual but sympathetic, trying to keep her cheerful as she tried to cope. Just as they'd grown used to this state, they were even managing to feel normal again. Along came the second baby, like a wave that overwhelmed her altogether. I'm shattered, she said. I'm never alone. I've always got to be there for the children. I even have to feed the cat. I take them out for a walk on Sunday afternoons, he protested. But it's like a favour, and it's only for a couple of hours. For pity's sake, I'm tired too. Sorry, she muttered. Sorry, but I don't feel like me anymore. You're too close to them, murmured Jonathan. You should cut off them a bit. Give yourself some space. How can I, sniffed Frances. Somebody's got to be devoted to them, and it's not going to be you because you're always at work. It's not easy for me either. I know it isn't, she replied, but at least you're allowed to be yourself. I'm not allowed to be myself anymore. He reached out his hand and they fell into each other's arms and hugged tightly. The late sun was surprisingly strong, so they decided to take the children down to the beach. Frances unbuckled Lorna's sandals and kicked off her own shoes and walked to the water's edge. She looked behind her when she saw Lorna building a pile of pebbles while Jonathan made the baby comfortable in the pushchair. She felt a rush of affection but walked on, looking out to sea and aware of her eyes making adjustments to the distance, as if they'd forgotten how to focus on the long view. She felt free. After some while, she narrowed her eyes to make out the little group around the pushchair. Of course, it was satisfying and delightful to see Jonathan lying with the baby on his stomach, while their daughter skipped round him, but she'd not needed babies to make her feel delight of life. It was there to start with. She started to walk back, higher up the beach this time, in the shade of the cliffs which held prehistoric snails and traces of dinosaur. I've done it, she thought. I brought 2 children into the world. She took her time, dawdling with delicate pleasure. I thought you disappeared out to sea and abandoned us, said Jonathan. Why would I do a thing like that, she said, and kissed him lightly. Matthew reached and tugged her hair. When I saw you over there by the rock pools, you looked just as you used to, said Jonathan. Just the same girl. However, I'm not just as I was, said Francis. I'm no longer the same girl. But isn't it mind-boggling, said Jonathan. Isn't it impossible to take in that we were last here, these 2 were just thin air, or less? They're so solid now I can almost believe there was a time before them. What? Said Lorna. What did you say? Francis scooped her up and held her gently in her arms. Now, after reading that passage, it's fairly clear that we're supposed to dislike Jonathan at the start. He seems to be not really pulling his weight. But perhaps that opinion changes when he starts empathising a little bit with his wife. So I think that's what the examiner will probably expect you to say. Something along the lines of, yep, you agree with the statement, Jonathan isn't particularly a good husband or father, but there are points where you can see what he might have been if he tried a little bit more. Let's look at 3 responses then. Candidate 1. Personally, I do not believe fully that the statement, the writer presents Jonathan as a failure as a father and husband, although Jonathan didn't put as much effort in as Francis. I'm fed up with having to plan it all. He still tried to be there for his wife and kids. Even though Francis is stuck at home all day looking after the kids, Jonathan also has to work all day providing for his family, as he is the only one who works. So, in a way, Francis and Jonathan both do their parts for the family. 2 marks out of 10. They give 1 opinion and 2 quotes, and there is some reference to what we think or feel about Jonathan, but with only 2 quotes to base it on, and only really 1 clear opinion, this candidate is going to struggle to get any higher than 2 marks. Candidate 2. You can see immediately a lot more has been written here, but the mark for 3 out of 10 seems to be a little bit worrying compared with how much they've actually written. I don't think Jonathan has failed as a father. Immediate opinion given, though he can sometimes be angry or snappy that he seemed. At the beginning of the extract, good linking then to the different parts of the extract. At the beginning of the extract, he is quite grumpy and impatient. Why does everything take so long? This feeling could relate to how he's under so much pressure and feels there is no time, and the time he does have is being taken from him. Well, true, but this is more explaining what the quote means rather than opinion. In the middle of the extract, the stress is clearly showing, and he's just taking it out on the people he loves. I don't get that when I get home. This is him being rude because he feels he has no time to himself and has to spend it looking out for or doing chores for the kids. Again, seems to explain the quote, shows how Jonathan feels, but doesn't really explain how the writer, that is, the person writing this exam answer, feels about Jonathan based on the quotes. During the middle of the story, Francis says, somebody's got to be devoted to them. This implies she thinks that he isn't even there for them, and she likes everything, feels like everything she does, everything for them, and is the only one who cares for them. Again, clear PEE seems to be appearing here, but no real reference to how we think or feel about Jonathan based on that quote. Towards the end of the story, Frances' opinion on it changes, and she sees him loving the kids and sees it as a good thing that they brought their children into the world, even though it changed loads. Once again, we've got to reference the events of the passage, but doesn't really give any reference either to the question set or indeed to the candidates' opinions. So 3 out of 10 awarded for this response because it simply does not contain the opinions that this question would require. Candidate 3, 6 out of 10. We'd expect immediately there to be a lot more reference then to opinions, and we'd expect there to be different opinions given. It might be this candidate's just about to say how they agree with the extract, but equally how they might disagree with parts of what Jonathan does as well. I agree with the fact that Jonathan is a failure as a father because the writer clearly shows his attitude. I first pictured him immediately then giving 2 opinions, the fact that this candidate agrees, and then what they first picture him doing. Having a bad attitude when he said, "Why is everything such a mess?" This implied to me that he's got a short temper towards the smallest things. The quote links to when he says, "What do you think I've been doing for the last hour?" Well, this implies to us that he raised his voice. The use of language when he says, "Are we ready at last?" is very far-fetched, but it clearly describes the fact he's impatient. This makes me feel as if the children would grow up to be impatient and outgoing. So we've got 3 quotes used here. We've got at least 2 to 3 opinions being given, and it's obviously referencing different parts of the extract. In this case, how we feel at the start. Overall, I think the writers created these thoughts and feelings because they want us to see how difficult it is for Francis to cope with his attitude and behaviour. It seems as if he's a difficult husband for Francis because he acts as if he's doing his duty as a father and a husband. We know this when Francis says, "I'm shattered." The use of language in this quote shows the reader that Francis is doing all the work towards looking after the kids. This makes Jonathan seem like a bad father and husband. I like the fact here they've clearly given an overview by saying overall. They've given a clear opinion about the character and they've used a quote. They've also inferred their opinion by saying that Jonathan seems like a bad father and husband. We've got a couple of references to the reader there as well. I think here the issue might be that they're beginning to repeat kind of the same thing, and they're not really looking at how the extract or the passage develops a character or the situation that character's in. When the writer says he reached out his hand and they fell into each other's arms and hugged tightly, it changes my opinion. So this candidate now begins to talk about, and this is the element that gets the 6, the critique. Her opinion changes on Jonathan and makes me feel he's got a soft spot but doesn't always show it. Overall, I think Jonathan's very stubborn. As a husband, it is duty to be there for his wife. 6 out of 10 awarded then, because there is some reference to critique, there are enough quotes to justify the opinions given, and there's at least 3, 4, maybe 5 opinions given in this whole response. So this would get a grade 5 then for the response in front of us at the moment. Let's look at the exam board's feedback then from the exam from last year. This is what the exam board sent to schools after the exam last time. Stronger responses were those that created a convincing argument that ran through the whole text. Weaker responses for those that disagreed with the statement offered. The passage will give an overview of the situation the characters are in. Jonathan is not in an easy situation, but there is evidence given by Francis that he could handle it better. The candidates should be aware of this when voicing their opinion. It is likely that some alternative viewpoints will be offered, and candidates should be guided to look for the quotes that allow them to agree with the statement, but they should also look for the few quotes that allow them to disagree. When I mark the mocks then, this is what I kind of found in the students in my class. Get your opinions in early. Make sure even the first sentence contains a clear opinion on the statement you're given. Make sure you don't overrun on previous questions, giving you enough thinking time to actually respond to question 5. It is really easy to still be in PEE mode, that is point, evidence, explain, and start talking about what words suggest or imply. This is what you've done in pretty much most of the other questions. Take a look at the question on the exam paper and remind yourself, this is a question about thoughts and feelings, not understanding of word choices. There is also no need for technical language to be used here. No marks are given for technical language in this particular question. Using that advice then, how would a really strong response look? I've colour-coded it with the parts that get marks, and in red you'll see the references to opinion. Overall, there is strong evidence to suggest that Jonathan is a failure as a father and a husband, but by the end of the passage, we also see how he's trying to do the best he can in a challenging situation. At the start of the passage, Jonathan is presented as a child. Why does everything take so long, moaned Jonathan. Makes me think that Jonathan's immature and silly, behaving the same way as the children. Francis clearly feels what we're all thinking. I'm fed up with having to plan it all. The writer gives us a long list of Francis's jobs compared with the lack of effort from Jonathan, who should be equally responsible for his children. We dislike Jonathan as he appears distant and negative as a husband and father. However, we realise Jonathan is at least trying to bring up his children by the middle of the passage. Don't shout, replied Jonathan. I don't think he handles the situation well by being rude to his children, but I appreciate that he's doing the best he can to control them. He even gives his wife space to go downstairs, which implies that he can be a good husband. I will obviously go on from this point, talk about more quotes, and how the character seems to be at least sympathetic to his wife by the end of the passage. Now we've gone through the passage itself, the question itself, how you're assessed, and my feedback that I would give you to improve, let's look at some practice questions. Please freeze the screen when each question comes up and give each one a go given the advice you've just been given. Practice question 1 and practice question 2. Thank you very much then for listening to this guide to question 5 from the EDUQAS English Language Paper 1 Section A. Good luck with your exam and all the best for the future.